Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lore You Know. It's good to be online today. Yay! I'm Jeremy Hochhalter. I'm here with Sarah Stewart, and we're going to talk about Slarecians. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
How's it
Yeah,
going?
it's going pretty good. Getting a little bit of lag.
Are you?
Yeah, I think when you went live, everything went hiccupy a little
Who?
bit. So okay
Hiccups.
though. It's okay though. It's okay. But yeah, we are good. I'm gonna apologize initially in advance. It is like height of allergy season, and my allergies are just like through the roof. So I apologize now if I sound a little like Donald Trump giving a speech as I'm sniffing. I'll double down on allergy meds to keep that as low as possible. So I apologize again if I start to get sleepy.
Yeah, that's okay.
But and I may mute if I have like a sneezing fit.
I'll
But
just message
so
Fran and be all like, "Go poke Sarah. She's asleep."
no. I'll be fine. I'll be fine. I'm also hyped on caffeine to counter that. So
Yay!
that's my initial uh uh call it thing there. Just to mention
Right?
that. Like my bad. So
So,
hopefully it won't be too bad.
yeah. So in the Scarlands, we've talked about the Titans and the gods, and essentially
Yep.
how the Titans formed the world, and sooner or later created the gods, and then the gods wiped out the Titans. Well, wiped them out in the way that the Titans can't actually die, but they're either imprisoned or hacked into little pieces. Last week we talked about dragons, which are a large part about the history of the world, and now we're going to talk about Slarecians, which are one of my favorite aspects
Oh
of
yeah.
Scarlands. And they're not
Oh
like
yeah.
super
They're
active in like modern day, but like they are a huge building block as to the feel and certain aspects of the world that I'm just like, yay.
yeah.
So,
I'm 100% with you. I love the Slarecians. I call them Slarecians. Some people call them
Slarecians.
Slarecians,
Yeah.
which I found just a little too clumsy to pronounce. There is an I there, so I'm leveraging it. It's Slarecian. And if you're familiar with the Slarecian Vault, it's obviously the same word, and that's
Right.
where the is from. I don't know why they called it the Slarecian Vault. I can guess because the Slarecians have vaults.
They do.
Because they
Yeah.
do.
I think it was funny because I think they're like, well, this just kind of rolls off the tongue. And I'm like, no, it
No,
doesn't.
it doesn't. It's really hard to say, and my players have a hard time. Some of my players have a hard time saying it too because it's like a very clumsy word.
Yeah.
But for what I think is a very cool non-playable race. You cannot play as Slarecians.
It's
Sorry,
true.
kids.
It's true.
But you can play things affected by them, certainly, and you could be like a warlock with like a Slarecian patron or something like that.
Right?
But they are I believe they were originally created to be sword and sorcerer's answer to psionics. It's
I think
like
you're
we need
right.
psionics were a big deal in the earlier days of D&D. They were a pretty big deal in 3.5, 3X. They came out with a psionic handbook, so they created these right from the get-go. They were in the earliest books,
Yeah.
these Slarecians. And basically, if you've been exposed to their stuff, you can get psionic abilities.
Yeah.
And that was and then that rooted in and merged with all the stuff in the psionic handbook. So psionic handbook has all these different specific, I don't want to say magical schools for psionics, but they're kind of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they mapped them to these Slarecian kind of groups. But to go back, who are these in terms of? So that's mechanics, but and obviously in addition, we don't have, to my knowledge, we don't have official psionics yet, unless something snuck in that I
There's
missed.
nothing official yet as
Yeah.
far as WotC
So
goes.
as far as WotC goes, there's
Yeah.
obviously some unofficial stuff all over the place, and there's some DM guide stuff and whatever, and I'm sure you can find 5e rules for psionics, but just going with the official stuff and the OGL stuff, kind of making it up as we go. So I haven't introduced psionics in my games yet. I hope to eventually. Either that or I'm just gonna go back to Pathfinder like a coward. But there you go.
I don't want to like spoil anything. There might be something coming out soon. It won't be an official WotC book, but
Yeah.
it's a okay. I might be working on this right now
Yeah, no. Yeah,
because
because I'll
one,
be
I like
happy
psionics, and two, like it's hard to play a Scarlands game
without
without
this.
psionics. It's
Yeah, or without like I mean, it's not hard. You can go.
you
There's
can't.
tons of
Yeah,
stuff you can
yeah,
do without it. But when you get into the deep meta plot and some of the higher level stuff,
yeah.
it's hard. It's hard because they're so critical. So when I talked about before, you had the Titan, before the coming of the gods, which is on the epic global scale, geological scale, recent. We had the Titans and their weird spirits. We had the dragons. We also had the ancients, i.e., the Slarecians, or their progenitors. They're quote gods, although not really gods. The Uthriac, which is another weird word. It's
Right.
kind of weird
I'm
to
I'm
say.
so glad that you had to say it and I didn't because
I call it Uthriac. I don't know. Again, that's me probably mangling the official pronunciation. It is spelled Uthriach. That's seeing Uthriac. I
yeah.
don't know. That's the best I can do.
So would you
So
guess the cover of the book you held up, Echoes from the
Echoes of
Past?
the Past. Yeah.
Would you say that is an Uthriac? Because it doesn't to me look like a
Um,
Slarecian.
I I don't know what it is. I think it's more. I think that figure it's like a statue, and I would call it more like a penumbra lord or something. But
Oh
it's got the
yeah,
weird, it's got the weird Slarecian like head stuff, but it's sort of tilted way back. If I
yeah.
want to show it my boogie nose, but the head is tilted way back, so it's kind of at a you're seeing it from like below its face.
Yeah,
So I have no idea. The art is pretty inconsistent, honestly, when it comes to
that
what
is true.
Slarecians and Uthriac look like. But there's one piece of art that looks like it's supposed to be what the Uthriac are. In this book. This book gets way deep, by the way.
It does. It is like one of
It
my favorite Scarlands books
oh,
too.
me too. I've run this. I'll get into this later, but
Nice.
let me talk about the history first. So way back when the Titans were first getting involved in like waking up and going to the moon and nomming on it and becoming Titan, the spirits go up and become the Titans. In and around that time, exactly when is not clear, these 9 weird energy something beings
Yeah.
were kind of floating around in like the astral plane or something. We don't know, something.
Whatever the
And
soup
they
was before the
what
world.
yeah, and they
Yeah.
caught wind of something interesting going on over here, like where Scarn eventually is, and they kind of went to take a look, and they're like, "Ooh, there's a thing going on. Let's go see what it is." And something drew them to Scarn, and as they kind of got caught up in something that happened, maybe around what was going on with the moon, maybe around the Titans being born, and they got trapped within Scarn somehow. They manifested as physical creatures, and they got stuck there. And they ended up going deep underground, like under the ocean, in the bedrock or wherever, into the Scarn's equivalent of the Underdark, but not really, because it's not a different plane, it's just underground. And kind of slept for a while. And they're massively powerful psionic creatures. So they have all these typical psionic powers like telepathy and psychometry and all the other weird abilities in D&D that start with the word psi. And they're sort of there, and eventually they sort of come and create physical form in some ways, although they can still travel astrally. But they can't travel astrally beyond the domain of what is Scarn. So it's like Scarn's astral plane or Scarn's ethereal plane, but not beyond that to traveling via the astral plane to some other world. They're still trapped in the Scarn's overall multiplanar ecosystem. So why can't we return to the rest of the multiverse? Mystery. I have a theory. I have a headcanon about that. I may get into that later if you let me. But suffice to say, there were these 9 weird things, and they each have a name, and they're considered theys or its. They don't have gender. And they um their whole raison d'etre for at least certainly 6 of the 9, if not all 9 of them initially, was to get out. They were like, we don't want to be here.
Yeah.
How do we go back? Being able to wander the multiverse in peace, or in evil peace, because
And
they're
we
kind of
we talked about this
dicks.
after last
Yeah,
week's episode, because essentially imagine that you are a being of energy and you can just do whatever you want and go wherever you want, and you don't have to feel, you don't have necessarily emotions the way that we do, you don't have, feelings, like you can't feel pain, you can't feel hunger, and all of a sudden to be stuffed into that,
yeah.
everyone's just like, get me out of here.
It's not clear if they need to eat. I don't think they feel hunger, but they certainly can feel pain, and they can
Yeah.
certainly feel and they certainly feel trapped. And so, uh, eventually, they make these construct creatures called what are called the Slarecians, and they become their sort of troops and their servants. Although they're themselves incredibly badass. Like, the Slarecians are not are entities of their own, and they are also not gendered, but they are, and they're not exactly constructs. They're not robots. They're very smart. They have their own will. They have their own personalities. And they made a bunch of them, and kind of populated the underground, and eventually started interacting with the creatures on the surface of Scarn. And then the people who lived on Scarn referred to them as the ancients a lot of the time. So you'll see references to the ancients, and then you'll see references to the Slarecians. These references may contradict each other. That's okay. I look at it as history gets fuzzy, especially when you're talking about millions of years.
Oh yeah.
So what is the truth of the Uthriac and the Slarecians is kind of a bit fuzzy. But the core books, they're mentioned in a couple of the core books, the Gelspad book, the Shamana book. The Echoes of the Past is the big book that talks about them. But they also touch on 2 other books I want to mention, which is Blood Bayou,
Yeah. I
unexpectedly.
was actually surprised to find out about that.
They're involved with that,
Spoilers.
and the Penumbra Pentagon,
Yeah.
which is about people who are kind of getting power from them. So they started kind of looking for ways of getting out, and they started studying mortals. When mortals, they realized they had these souls, and when they die, their souls kind of leave Scarn. Now they just come back and get reincarnated again, but they knew instinctively that this was some way, or they suspected, I guess, maybe not instinctively. They're very, very, I think of them as evil mad scientists, because they're very dispassionate in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
what they do, and they look at people as like things under a microscope they can
Or at
see.
least what people would think of as evil, because I don't think they think they're evil. They're not like,
No,
Mwah!
no, but they really have no concept of mercy, because they see everything as a scientific experiment. They
Yeah.
don't, and they're very, very few of them like to start care for their lab mice. And they just about everything on Scarn except the Titans and maybe the dragons. They don't really interact with the dragons, but pretty much everything else they see as lab mice, because they're so powerful that they pretty much can.
Yeah.
So they started experimenting on people, and basically trying to figure out what is this soul thing, and working on that, and creating all these things. And they actually had treaties between several of the empires on Scarn, and be like, if you give us a couple of people every year, very, very typical kind of evil. If you give us a couple of people every year, we won't mess with you, and we'll give you some stuff.
Right.
And of course the emperors are like, a couple of people every year, yeah, we can do that. Here's a couple, give us stuff, and don't hurt us. So they had this sort of a loose agreement, and they had these long contracts, because they were really big into being very official. The Slarecians. This is specifically the Slarecians, not so much the Uthriac, but presumably the Uthriac are behind the scenes shifting the levers, but it's not really clear. And there's Slarecian stuff throughout all the source books. Mithra book has this underground complex where the Slarecians are mucking about with interdimensional spaces. That I ran that ages and ages and ages ago. It was one of my early campaigns. And they're just their fingers are in everything. Like you in Mullis Town, one of the cities of in Eastern Gelspad, so south of Mithril, east of Vesh. There's just like city, state, town, and there's Slarecian ruins, like right there. And there's actual people studying them. You know, uh, allergy meds are kicking in, and I can't think of the word. Indiana Jones kind of people. What are they called?
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists. Thank you so
Yay!
much. There's archaeologists studying these old ancient. They call them ancient ruins with these weird monoliths with symbols on them, and digging them up and finding these strange artifacts that nobody understands. That it's all Slarecian stuff. And so that was going on for a long time. That's more modern, but there's these weird ruins and everything all across Scarn. You dig deep enough, you find Slarecian stuff. Well, the Titans saw them as a threat, understandably, and they went to war with them twice. There's two wars against the Slarecians. One that happens either in the early days of the gods or before the gods were born. I know they teamed up with the elves, because there's a mention in the Elven lore that there was a war with the Slarecians, and that kind of destroyed their first empire, which is like way pre, like hundreds of thousands of years before modern times on Scarn. Not a lot of information about the first Slarecian war beyond there was one. So you can dig for that. And then the Slarecians went underground after that. They're like, right, don't mess with the Titans. They're a bit too powerful for us. And they got more subtle. And that was after that they started doing the contracts. And one of the ones that was mentioned specifically in the lore was with the Lydian Empire, which was the big empire that was built during the epoch of Mesos. So, more modern, recent times. Still like 5,000 years,
Right.
but still more modern, recent times. So they had contracts with them. That was around when there was like, you give us a couple people and we'll give you stuff. When the gods showed up, the Uthriac got super interested, because suddenly they were seeing that they were already doing all this research in spirits, and they were seeing like, oh wow, there's these beings out there that get energy from these mortals,
Yeah.
and they're controlling where the spirits go when they die. Could we use that somehow to get out?
Right.
So they were like, we've got to try this. So they captured a god. The god of, his name is now I'm flaking on his name. See, the allergy pills are really kicking in,
Was
because
this
this is like my tongue. And this is actually really important.
Hang on, I got this. Are you talking about Hadaris?
Yes.
Yes.
Hadaris. The god of murder, Belsmith's oldest child.
Right.
And wow, allergy meds are really kicking in now. I'm so sorry. Ooh, creepy. So Hadaris was captured by the Uthriac, or the Slarecians. No, by the Uthriac themselves, because the Uthriac actually got involved. And one of the Uthriac named Deturne, called Deturne the Eben, he was each of the Uthriac have a sphere of influence over various psionic, like I said before, schools.
Yeah.
So like one of them is big on telepaths, and one of them is big on astral travel, and one of them is big on constructs, and so they've all got these schools. There's only 6 basic schools, though, I think 6 in the Psionic Guide. They tapped into there's 9 of these Uthriac, so there's like 3 extra. Deturne, it's Dyterne. Help me if I'm saying it wrong. He wasn't involved in one of those 6 schools. He kind of his area comes into play and around when they start digging through gods. So they capture the god of murder, and basically try to figure out how he works. And I think of this as, and the way I imagine this, if anybody read Sandman, when the weird Crowley captures Morpheus, the god of the Sandman dream, and has him like in a prison. I always picture like de Tournai in sort of a similar prison that the Uthriac made. They never created a prison for Adaris, and they basically try to figure out how he works, and they end up killing him as a result of this because they dug a little too deep. And they don't even get power from him; they just sort of kill him. They get some power from him, but it allows de Tournai to create this weird artifact called the Rod of Souls. And so they're like, well, that's screwed up. Let's find another god. So they're like, well, it didn't work out with that god. We need another god. So lo and behold, Adaris's sister, who is not revealed until way, way later, this is actually his sister, but Drendari, the goddess of shadows, is kind of wants to know where her brother is. And she's like following me, like, where did he go? I don't know where he's been. She goes and she discovers he's been captured by these Uthriac, so they capture her. And they're like way more careful with her than they were with her brother. And they experiment on her. They leverage this Rod of Souls and start just drawing power out of her. And eventually the gods get wind of it, and they come in and rescue her. And there's a bunch of gods come in and rescue her. I don't know, remember the specific outcome of that, but it did trigger the second Slarecian War not long after, where the only time that the gods and the Titans actually team up on a large scale.
Yeah.
There's many times where they team up on a small scale where, like, Mesos and Bellsmith go do a thing or whatever. But for the most part, this was like a major scale team up. And they were just like, we need to stop these Uthriac from kidnapping gods and sucking their power out of them.
And I feel like it's a reflection of how much power that the Uthriac and the Slarecians gained over those millennia, that the gods all of a sudden had to get involved in order to throw them down. So
because they did beat them down in the first war, and that was just mostly the Titans.
Right.
And this is the gods and the Titans getting together. And it was so much that they actually took the Uthriac this time and caged them and put them in sort of it's not clear what exactly, but in sort of maybe an oubliette or some other subdimension where they imprisoned 8 of them in this prison. Although by this point, one of them did well, the one who didn't get in prison, we'll get to that. The Tournai, though, by that point was pretty messed up, because when he used the Rod of Souls, or it used the Rod of Soul, they used the Rod of Souls. I don't know what I think of de Tournai as male, just because of there's like a personality in there. Most of them are they, but for whatever reason, that's not how de Tournai goes in my mind. It gets splintered, and they actually sent like a piece of themselves through time. So theoretically, there could be like this de Tournai monster somewhere in the future out there. And there's so much of them wrapped in the Rod of Soul, which is also wrapped into Drendari. And there's like it's a spoiler country if you guys ever play this.
All right.
So, warning, spoilers. But there's a piece of him in Drendari, and should she ever get her hands on the Rod of Souls, she could potentially turn into him, or that piece of his personality come out and overtake her personality. So she'd be going from sort of chaotic, neutral, happy-going goddess of shadows to a cold, manipulative, insane, because turning went nuts, chaotic evil, god thing of psionics and shadows. And that would be bad. So we don't want her to get the Rod of Souls.
This sounds like an adventure. Wait a minute.
Yes, totally. And I ran this adventure. The gods actually took the Rod of Souls, stuck it in the elemental plane of fire, Scarlands' version of the elemental plane of fire, and the city of Brass, blocked the city of Brass, which didn't make the Djinn very happy. Then locked away the elemental plane of fire,
right,
which really didn't make the Djinn very happy. And all of the elemental planes, they locked them down before. They're like, you guys are not doing this. And they're like, no more Djinn. And Djinn are a pain. It's like kind of like the dragons left. It's like everybody knew the war was coming. And so they locked the Titans, and the gods are like, nope, no Jinn, no Rod of Souls, no Uthriak, everything's locked away. And the Slarecians obviously get locked away with most of the Slarecians get locked away with Uthriak. There's just still a handful mucking about on Scarn, but for the most part, the Slarecians gone. Now, one thing I skipped over during that time, when the gods, way back when the gods were first showing up, and before they captured Hadaris, before they did all that, the Uthriak recognized that the gods were a potential way for them to get out. So initially when there was these clearly the people, the roles on Scarn batting with each other between those who worship the Titans and those who worship the gods, well before any wind of the divine world, they were like, we need these mortals to survive, and we're afraid the Titans are just going to kill them all. So they put a lot of effort into making sure that the followers of the gods lived and survived enough for the gods to gain enough power for the Uthriak to get interested in them.
It's
so
one of my most favorite twists.
They played the two sides against each other. So they didn't want them to team up, but they also wanted the gods to be powerful enough to be a force. So these three sides were kind of constantly, because the Uthriak are just as powerful as the Titans, pretty much, are on the same power level as the Titans and the gods. So add to that, you've got your 13 Titans, you've got your dozen major gods and a bunch of minor gods, then you've got your 9 Uthriak. So there's a lot of uber powerful beings on Scarn.
Yeah.
And that's almost pushing. It's not quite triple digits, but compare that to your typical pantheon on any other D&D realm, and unless you like merge realms together, Scarn's got a lot of powerful beings.
Yeah.
And that's not even getting into like the Tarask, which exists, another story, or the dragons or any of that stuff. So that's happening. So they did that. They pitted the gods against, like, and built up the mortals and helped them and like gave them stuff. So, Second Slarecian War happens. The Uthriak are put away in a box. Well, their followers are still around, and they got splintered off. You've got they were called the Eyes of the Night. The Slarecians had a bunch of followers. We're just like, we'll get power from these weird beings, and the Slarecians says, yes, you will. We want to keep you alive for we can express. So they would give them power, and because they tapped into Drendari's power, and they get sucked a bunch of that power and some of Hadaris's power, they kind of had access to what would be kind of domains of death and Stratos. And so you got these elements of shadows and in there. You know where I'm going with this?
I think so.
The Eyes of the Night splintered into multiple cults after this Second Slarecian War. You have the ones who went kind of the magic route, and the dark, shadowy route, which are the Penumbrals. They're these shadow mages, led by this like weird elf guy who's really screwed up, and they went and kind of did their thing. You've got the other side, which are the Eyes of the Night, which eventually became what's called the Cult of the Ancients, which were basically more into the kind of the murder half and more into just looking for artifacts of the ancients and gaining power from them. So less about psionics and just more about finding weird shit that they can use. Later on, Belsmith got wind of this, and Belsmith, they screwed with 2 of her kids. Tell me she's not has a hate on for the Slarecians, because in my book she has a major hate on for the Slarecians.
Yeah.
They killed one of her kids and they messed with another one.
Yeah.
So she got involved in the Cult of the Ancients and created another splinter group, where she created kind of got a bunch of them to follow her, and they became Belsmith's assassins of the Cult of the Ancients. So you have the original Cult of the Ancients, which were just like, we're gonna find freaky artifacts of these ancient beings.
Yeah.
We don't even know. They don't even know they were called the Slarecians. Just weird stuff they found. Doing digging up through the dirt, finding stuff. So she's like, no, I'm going to have this group, splinter group called of the Ancients, and they're going to be assassins. And they're going to use this magic that they got from my son. And they're going to go off and do their thing and be my followers. So that's kind of, these are 3 of the branches. And then finally, there's another branch involved in this, not directly related to the Slarecians, but who are fighting against specifically Numberlord, which is Drendari's group, because she survived her imprisonment. She lost a lot of her power, but she still has some power. She's enough to be a demigoddess, not a very powerful demigoddess, but a decent demigod. And she has her own faction called the Shadow Walkers and the Shadow Dancers. And one of their main missions is basically to beat down the Penumbra Lords and make sure they don't get too much, because they're like, those are the guys who stole the shadow magic. We fight them. So her followers go against that. So they've got those 2 factions, the Shadow Walkers and the Penumbra Lords in one area, and then they've got the Cult of the Ancients and the Order of the Ancients in another area. So the Order of Ancients are the guys digging up the artifacts, and the cult assassin. So all of that happens. That's all modern day stuff. Oh, what did I skip? Oh, right. The 9th Uthriac.
So Fran does point out that Shardoon hates the crap out of the
Oh, yeah.
So why does Shardoon hate the
Why does Shardoon hate the crap out of
Yeah.
I shall have to remind me. Like allergy meds are kicked in too strongly.
No worries. We'll move on, and she can type in.
She can come over and whisper in my other ear.
There you go.
But what was I saying? So I was saying there's 9 Uthriac.
Yeah.
So you've got I'm like looking at the list. You've got the 6 that are associated with the various psionic, psychic schools, or whatever they call them. You've got 3 more. You've got the Turning, who I mentioned, who is associated with shadows eventually, and he creates a lot of cool stuff. And then you've got Valir, who's like my favorite of them all. Even Cyclus should be my favorite, but I love Valir as well. Valir has got more into magic. He's the only one who really got into magic, except maybe Deterni to a limited extent. But Valir really dug his fingers into the concept of magic and combining magic with psionics, and he gave birth to the Slarecian dragons. He turned some of his Slarecian minions into weird, crazy dragons.
Yeah.
And they have these horns, kind of like a black dragon, but a little different. And he really dove into these concepts of what you can do with magic. The Slarecian dragons are just weird. They have these anti-magic auras and stuff, and they can use their breath to basically cause Organ-Canian's disjunction to happen, and just anti-magic fields, and their horn can absorb magic and all of that. So they're really messed up dragons. You do not want to fight one, because it's like, oh, my magic's useless.
Right?
This sucks. Slarecian dragon, they're way too powerful. But I will say that one actually comes into play in the original Scarlands Forsaken novel series. As Vladwin actually has to deal with a Slarecian dragon and gets his hands on one of those horns. No spoilers for that series of novels. We didn't touch them in Vigilant, but we be in future books. Here's a clue. Our series subtitle is called Through Shadows and Dreams.
Wait a minute.
That's a big clue right there. It has something to do with this madness. Because to talk about the 9th Uthriac is Cyclus. And I might be pronouncing that one wrong. I apologize again. It's not listed on this page. He's in much the way Deterni gets involved in shadows and shadows gets involved in dreams. And when all of the other Uthriac, very, very early in the beginning, are underground and they're doing their thing and they're starting to figure out what they're going to do and experiment, Cyclus goes off and he astral projects, because they can do that because they're psions, and he finds himself in this weird other dimension that seems to be this weird plane, seems to be created through the thoughts of the mortal being on the surface of the planet. And he discovers this is the dream. And using his various super abilities, can manipulate things and do stuff. And he's like, this is cool. But he realizes pretty quick that this is only possible because of the thoughts of the people on the planet. And he's like, starts giving a shit about them. Because he's like all the other Uthrek cared about the mortals insofar as it gets them to their eventual goal. They're like, we need them so we can experiment on them so we can figure out how to leave. Cyclus is a little different. He's like, I'm interested in this. I'm finding this fascinating. I want to learn more about how these dreams work and what is this. And initially it's like, yeah, so I can get out. But he starts getting more involved. And at some point, before maybe near the Slarecian War, at some point, well before the Divine War, Mesos, he's the Titan of Magic. He like kind of senses something weird is happening in the dreams, and he sends Vangal and possibly some others. I have theories that maybe Hadaris went, but I don't know. But he sends Vangal out and basically says, find whoever it is, this over entity mucking about in the dream realms, and stop this because I don't like it. So Mesos has a big concern against the Uthrak, and a lot of Mesos' stuff and experiments have a lot to do with learning what they are and building things to stop them. So anyway, he sends Vangal and other Vangal's forces out to the Dream Realms, and Vangal finds Cyclus and rips him up, just shatters him through god magic and some tricks of Mesos and whatever else. So that is that's like a minor time god and a Titan teamed up. They totally shatter Cyclus. And that's where it comes into play, this book.
Yeah.
Bayou. And you're like, what is Blood Bayou? So Blood Bayou.
And this may include spoilers for those of you who just got the
big spoilers.
the new Creature Collection book.
Yeah.
It doesn't talk about this.
Not talk about this at all. So huge spoilers. So in Blood Bayou, there's this entity basically runs it, called the Jack of Tears or Momus, the Laughing Man. Many names for this guy. He's as powerful as a demigod. And Blood Bayou, which is this bayou, swamp in Termana, in the northwestern coast of Termana, where Kadam's deluge, Kadam's giant tsunami hit Termana, took out like a good quarter, maybe fifth of the continent, just totally took it out. And this swamp was part that was left behind. So think like Louisiana, but bloody and worse. Like way worse. Like, we thought the mosquitoes were bad in the American South. No, this is way worse. He rules it now. So in the 150, 200 odd years since since Kadam's deluge, this being comes out of nowhere, called the Jack of Tears. They named the Jack of Tears, and he controls it. And that Blood Bayou has this kind of tie to the dream realms, and it's like nightmare though. It's not like happy dreams. This is just nightmare bad realms, and it draws in crazy people and like people who are legitimately insane. Flock there, and he pulls in all of this stuff, and he's in many ways the sort of a demigod of nightmares, sort of. And his origin is that he's one of the splintered factions of Cyclus. So when Cyclus was broken up by Vangal, bits of him get scattered across basically northern Termana, as far as we know. And they manifest eventually into various creatures, people. They all look humanish. They don't certainly look anything like an Uthriac. There's no indication they're anything like an Uthriac. They're not Scion. You can't tell. They're not mortal, that's for sure. They don't die of old age. They don't seem to age. But they're not, and most of them appear human, kinda. At least humanoid. And there's 6 known aspects of what was Cyclus. Well, 5. There's the Jack of Tears, who's arguably one of the most powerful bits. Again, I'm looking for the actual page. There's this weird lich. I don't know. Who's I'm trying to find the page because I have names down. I apologize that I don't have a page open. What chapter? There's this lich. There's this woman who's like kind of into politics. There's a sage who builds a castle and somewhere on the north coast of Termana, not quite near Blood Bayou, who's just like, I to know information and knowledge. There's woman sage Jack, and there's this weird guy who's like a farmer, and he just kind of leaves the area and wanders around and just start getting married and having kids. And okay. Oh, apologies. Oh, it's in the term. Oh, I'm in the wrong book. That's why I can't. I think it's in this book.
So many source books.
So many source books. Oh my gosh. The Truth from 78. Okay. So I just remember it was called The Truth.
While you're looking that up, I do find it interesting that in the creature collection that just came out, the Carnival crew is in there, and a lot of that is in Termana. So maybe we will be seeing Termana show up in the near future as far as accessible 5th edition lore.
But I would also say that they muck about in Galspad.
They do.
Because one of the things that Jack does is he sends these Heron priests, these weird, and the Heron priests are also in the new creature collection. He sends these Heron priests out to various places to collect people insane and brings them back to Blood Bayou. So, they wander across the world and presumably across Galspad. At least we know they wander across Galspad and Termana, basically going to insane asylums and gathering people and bringing them off on ships back to Blood Bayou.
Yeah.
Probably to turn them into monsters. So anyway, I found the page. So we have the Lich. I said it was called Lord Storm Raven. So he's not really a lich, but he's basically looks like a lich. He's a walking skeleton creature. Maybe it was Cyclus's skeleton come to life. I don't know, but he doesn't look like a Slarecian skeleton.
Right.
They're made of crystal. So how does that work? There's the sage called Therix, the All-Knowing. He lives, like I said, he lives in this tower somewhere, kind of on the shores of the Blood Sea in Termana, near-ish to Blood Bayou. But because of his nature, he doesn't connect himself with Jack. There's Nadira, the woman I mentioned, a female courtier, and she's like the manifestations of Cyclus' ambition. So, and she's like basically mucks about in politics, and maybe in Termana, maybe in Galspad, so she could show up. And then you have Silverhelm, one of my favorites. I love him. He's the guy, this oldish man, but like tough. Like to see him, he would be like, he's supposed to be a farmer, but he's like immortal, but he's got gray hair or silvery hair. Silverhelm, and he basically goes around from town to town having kids. So he'll go to a town and he'll have some kids, and then they get old enough to, like, he knows they're not going to die of babiness. He goes and leaves and goes to another town for kids, and he's just been wandering around the world, or at least from, again, Termana and probably Galspad, having kids, and just kind of this amnesiac, weird,
right. But
guy.
I think it's important to point out here that because the Uthrak don't breed, they're not that whatever it is that broke Cyclus apart
made him human.
Right.
Yeah, and so other than being immortal, Silverhelm is all intents and purposes human.
Yeah.
Because he can breed and he can have kids. And what's interesting is all of kids are kind of prodigies. They all are, I don't want to say destined to be something, but they all have the potential PC glow or good stats.
Right.
So whenever you find an NPC with really good stats, you're like, I wonder if he has kids. But they're all supposed to go on to become like champions or some other kind of heroic thing. Not necessarily on the side of the Titans or the gods, or they could be on anybody's side. They could be good or evil, but they're all kind of badass in some way, or at least potentially badass, depending on what happens to them. And then finally, you have the Jack of not finally, but you have the Jack of Tears, who's definitely very, very powerful, much more powerful than the other aforementioned. Despite, yes, there's a lich, but he's even more than that. And his whole thing is nightmares and kind of like bringing crazy by you. He's got this huge area that he controls. And he, as far as we know, has no concept that he was part of this cyclist.
Right.
But I mentioned 6. So totally, only talk about 5. The 6th one is the God of Dreams, Arias. And this is like super spoilery. Because Arias, obviously the most powerful 6, full demigod and powerful than Jack of Tears. He's the God of Dreams as the total dreamer. But he wasn't part of the Splinter. We know his parents are Belsameth, going back to Belsameth. Belsameth's 3rd kid, having something to do with the Slarecians.
Right.
Belsameth, and his father is Mazos. Again, Mazos, really interested in finding out what the Slarecians are up to and trying to stop them. So there's a dig in right there. And they gave birth to Arias. And I suspect that, and that's what the lore implies, that Mazos took some of that power from Cyclus during Vangel's whole ripped Cyclus in pieces and stuck it into Arias when Arias was
I
made.
couldn't imagine Mesos do. No, that's absolutely something Mesos would do.
He would do.
This is my child. I can't. Yes, I can.
This is completely his MO. So and Belsameth, I don't know if she was aware that he was doing that, but she clearly has a hate on for the Uthrak. Now, did this happen? Was Arias? We know Hadaris and was the oldest kid of Belsameth. We don't know if Arias was like born after the Slarecian. Is he younger than Jadari? Is he older than Rendari?
Right.
It's not really clear. We know that Cyclus was splintered long before the 2nd Slarecian War, in and around that time. But we know that these other than Arias, the other 5 aspects didn't really wake up until Kadim's deluge hit Termana. There's rumors of maybe them having around, but it was that Titan blood that turned Jack of Tears freaking nuts and evil, and because Titan blood does that to you. It kind of warps you, and so I don't know what happened to the other 4, whether they'd been around since Cyclus was splintered or Kadim's deluge made them. But I will say this, at least Silverhelm is not evil. And there's no indication that Therex, the sage, is evil. He seems to be kind of a neutral, maybe even neutral good. Silverhelm certainly has a good vibe around him in his description. So, all those women wouldn't have married him, right? Like, how many wives has this guy gone through? You figure about every 5 years or so, popping another kid. So that happens. But the other one's Lich. He's probably evil, and you've got the courtier who's all ambition, so power hungry.
She's a politician, so obviously she's
some
level of evil.
So who knows how these entities came into play, but they've been mucking around. Stormraven's apparently an Asherak. That's the only thing that was interesting. So if they all started, either they got splintered and separated across the world, whatever. We know Stormraven's an Asherak. We know Therex is Termana. We know Arias is in Dreamland. And Jack of Tears is in Termana. And Nadira and Silverhelm can be wherever you need to be them to be in your campaign.
Right.
Probably Gelstad. So I imagine them walking around. So that's like a thing that happened. So 3 of Belsameth's kids are about the stuff in the end of the Uthrak. Mazos is about the end of the Uthrak. And then finally we've got the other thing that Echoes of the Past gives us, which is a meta plot that is not core meta plot. So when you think about the meta plots of the Scarred lands, the original meta plot of the Scarred land. We had the Divine War, which happened 150 years ago, and then you have a couple of specific things post game time that can occur in your campaign. The resurrection of the elf god. This was the thing, one of the source books came out that showed what Scarn looks like when the elf god gets resurrected. So far hasn't come up in 5th edition yet, but there's certainly hints around it. That we may not incorporate that. That was a lot of what happened in the meta plot around release of trilogy of books. The Forsaken trilogy describes the resurrection of the gods. Our book Vigilant canon, but right now it only talks about some stuff that happened pre AV 150. It ends right at the beginning of AV 150 and incorporated into the Serpent and Flora campaign. As I said, Vigilant subtitles through shadows and dreams. Leave that hanging. Could be involving. Is there a meta plot around the Slarecians? There is one in the books. It is considered a splinter plot, not a canon plot. So canon-wise, the Slarecians don't return currently. But you could run that if you ran this. There's actually a timeline as to how that could work for you as a GM to, like, if the Slarecians came back. It would require, like, a couple of different things could happen. Would almost certainly require somebody getting their hands on the Rod of Souls. So you can break into the elemental planes. Oh, look, 5th edition elemental planes seem to have reopened. Like, you can have a djinn if you're warlock. You can have a djinn as your patron. So that implies that you can get to the elemental planes now. Is the City of Brass open? Can you get your hands on that Rod of Souls? Is that where it lives in 5th edition? I don't know. GM, I guess. So there's that. But should she get her hands on it? She clearly wants it in the old lore. Does she still want it in the new lore? Is this part of the new lore? I don't know yet. But I suspect if she got her hands on it, bad things would happen. So that's one way. Another way is underneath Lokiel. This is touched on area? Is it literally called Area 51?
I think it's 53 or 35 or something.
Yeah. There's this underneath Lokiel. There's ancient ruins, i.e., ruins of the ancients, underneath the Library of Lokiel, that big volcano off in the Ukrudan Desert in western Gelspad. And there's why am I still flaking on that word?
Archaeologist.
I cannot think of that word today. I blame the allergy medication. So there's archaeologists digging into these ruins underneath Lokiel, underground, obviously Slarecian ruins, and they're digging up stuff. Could there be a Slarecian dragon down there? Could there be other Slarecian monsters down there? And so there's all that implication as well. So you can conceivably introduce the Slarecian to your campaign through that. And then, just should you get your hand on anything an ancient, the Slarecians have a way of stuff they left behind. And a bunch, and I mentioned this during COVID-19 hell, they've infected their stuff, their artifacts, with what has been dubbed the Slarecian language virus. So if you find one of these tomes or trinkets or whatever they are, and a block with text on it, and try to read it, or cast tongues or cast comprehend languages and try to read it, you could get infected with this virus that makes it so that you can only speak and understand Slarecian. You can think in your own language, but you can't speak your own language anymore, and you can't understand your own language anymore. So you can only understand people basically from the perspective of everyone else. You're speaking gibberish.
Yeah. And it's important to note that magic doesn't make it change, so you can't use comprehend languages to know what they're talking about.
No. So you kind of get a gist of it, but you can't understand the people around you, because you can't cast spells with verbal components anymore. So unless you can somehow cast comprehend languages or tongues without a verbal component, which maybe you've got that meta magic feat and you could get away with it, but otherwise you're pretty much screwed. But the worst part is that as soon as you start speaking this language, you contaminate everybody around you who can hear your
Yeah.
voice. So suddenly everybody in your little group of adventurers is speaking gibberish. You can understand each other, but the rest of the world can't understand you. So go find a cleric with like cure disease, because that's what you're gonna need to get this out of your system. But as a result, some small percentage of people who get infected with this language virus end up getting psionic abilities. At least that's what it was in 3X. In
Yep.
5th edition, psionics, I don't know how that's going to work yet, but certainly that was the case in 3X, where I got the language virus, and I did this to my players. I was like, they got exposed to language virus, they cured it, but then I said, now would any of you like to cross class and pick up a level in
Nice.
a psionic class?
So-
because I will allow this now.
So, is this a good time to talk about Mebic? Because Fran seems to think it is.
Mebic was our keyword about when people get the language virus, they would just, as our way of role playing the gibberish, people just walk around going Mebic, Mebic, Mebic. And so I was like, oh, you got the language virus, and then slowly it would, like, I'd be making people make Constitution saves or whatever it was at the time. I was like, make your fortitude save. Oh no, you've got it too. And like 2 of them would be like looking at each other, talking just fine, and looking at the rest
Mebic.
party going Mebic.
I like it.
And then like the one guy who made the save is like, crap, what do I need to do? And they had to figure out like, oh, curse or cure disease or something to fix everybody. And then afterwards I'm like, who would like to play a psionic? And they're all like, nope.
Oh, I would have totally jumped on that. So
we did later. We did eventually have people playing Fran actually played a
Nice.
psychic campaign. So we definitely introduced all of that madness. And there's all these weird things that the Slarecians and touched. One of the other legacies in Termana, there's this jungle, the southeast coast, south of the Charduni Empire, is this jungle called the Tepuje jungle, and that's where you can find like the other cat people. Because the Manticore aren't enough, we have another cat. Because furries on Scarn.
it is.
The Tepuje jungle. Yeah.
This, we might have to have an episode that is just like furries of Scarn, and then we're gonna realize it's like 90% of Scarn.
No, like I'd say 75. We still have elves and dwarves and stuff.
It's true.
And Hollow Legionnaires aren't furries,
But they could be.
They could. No, like armor. They're anyway. We're going way off topic. So Tepuje jungle. There's these funky crystals, and we know that, or from the lore, Slarecians are big into crystals because they've got this whole vibe going with like weird crystal creatures and like these crystalline gates and the crystalline skulls, crystal gargoyles, and so there's these crystals in this jungle that Mesos was incredibly interested in. So there's a whole subplot there where because Mesos is interested in the Mithriac, kind of wants to stop them. You could conceivably use these crystals to do some psionic things. There's a bunch of Mesos followers in that jungle who are also have psionic powers. So there's some stuff going on there, and like tapping into these funky crystals. So could these crystals have found their way to Gelspad in various places? Could people use them to do funky things? So there's that kind of an element. And I mentioned these other crystal things. There's these gateways, these crystal gateways that they're intelligent, not just an archway, but an intelligent archway that the Slarecians and Uthriac used to try to transport to other dimensions to try to escape. Like, we found it to the astral plane. Oh, it's still stuck to Scarn. We found our way to the elemental plane of fire. Oh, it's still stuck to Scarn. We couldn't get to the rest of the multiverse. And they built these gates, and then they also created these muses. They're like these weird crystal skulls that are, I think, really cool, and they have that kind of weird fractured look of crystals. And presumably there's one for each race in Scarn, or race that existed at the time that the Slarecians were about. So sorry, no Manticore skull, but no Hollow Legionnaire Manticore, but most of the other races would have them. And they would create this kind of charm effect on people, and people who get them would sort of become obsessed with them and start listening to them and getting ideas from them, and with the intent of eventually go find the rod of souls. Go upstairs, and they get that kind of bug in their ear of like that sense that, oh, I've got this muse. And there may be very, very powerful people on Scarn who have muses. Don't want to get too much spoilery on that front, but there's rumors. Very powerful, badass people have muses in their closet that they listen to on occasion that give them bad advice, like go invade Barak Torn because there's a gate there that may let our god out.
Right.
So could be why. Why that's happening. So it's hard to go anywhere in Scarn without some kind of Slarecian thing get involved.
Yeah.
As we said, once you get past like level 10, you get into high politics, it's in there. It's wrapped around there. So it's all seeded throughout the thing. Was there anything else I want to talk about? I think there was something else. Oh, right. My headcanon. So, is it okay if I talk about my
Absolutely.
crazy head? This may be spoilers. This may be spoilers for future books of Through Shadows and Dreams. I don't know yet. So if it is, it's like for book 9 that may never get written. But why are they stuck?
Yeah.
Why can't they leave Scarn? What is it about Scarn that it is isolated from the rest of the universe? And I had that question. Then I had a couple other questions. What's up with the moon? Why were the spirits, the Uthriak, when they went to the moon, they nommed on the moon, they became the Titan? What was special about the nameless orb, that second moon, that it did that? And then finally, why is Scarn weirdly shaped? Like, you've got, like, if the Dragonlands is on the South Pole, but it's warm there. If there's, they claim that Scarn is a sphere, but but they also say that the Asherak, the other far continent, it's across the Blood Sea. Right? They say it's across the Blood Sea. So if you're in Gelspad, you have to cross the Blood Sea to get to Asherak. Why can't you go the other way?
Yeah.
Why can't you go west across the Blossoming Sea or whatever that sea's Shining Sea, I don't know, some shiny name, non-blood. Why can't you go that way and get to Asherak, go on the other side?
Yeah. And just to clarify, it has been set in canon that Scarn is not a disc world. It's not flat.
It's not a disc.
It is an orbish.
It's a sphere.
Yeah.
It's a sphere-ish. So why can't you go that way? And if it's because the sea is too big, geographically, Scarn would be like 5 times the size of Earth for the sea to be that much bigger than to not be able to get crossed. So mysteries. So I had these mysteries, and I was like, I've got one explanation for the whole thing, and it's weird and wacky. What if the moon, and I'm going to go back to this, came from something that Anthony Pryor was one of the original authors of the Scarlands. Wasn't one of the core writers like Karakar and Marmel, who were like kind of the core guys, but he was one of the designers. And he also worked on a 3X book called Elder Evils, and introduced this Elder Evil called it's called the Afterbirth of the Universe, or the Multiverse, called this orb, this planetoid that was just pure death, evil, awfulness, just totally negative energy, undead, evil thing. And so I connected the two. I was like, he worked on Scarlands. He worked on Elder Evils. I asked him about this. He said no, but he said this was a cool idea, so he said fly with it. Like, this wasn't my intent, but I love it. And what if the Nameless Orb was something like that Elder Evil? Was some kind of evil thing that the multiversal, external to Scarlands gods, call them what you will, the gods of whatever other multiverses out there, had this thing, conquered it, but couldn't kill it, so they decided to imprison it. So they found this, what appeared to be a lifeless planet, stuck it in orbit, and then isolated said planet, its sun, its other moon, in its own little demi-universe, its own little oubliette, with its own little demi-planes, off from the rest of the multiverse, completely trapped. So that moon couldn't mess with the rest of the multiverse ever again. And that explains why. And then the Uthrak gets sucked in right at the time that is locked. They can't get out. That's why they can't get out. The Titans go up to this moon. The moon's trying to get out. It's smart. It tries to get out. It tries to like nom on the sun, maybe cause it to explode or something. Tries to break out. And the Titans are like, or who became the Titans are like, nope. They go to the moon. They nom on it. They take away its power. They become the Titans. But as their epochs progress, they become evil. Why are they becoming evil? That thing was super, super evil. That's why it was in prison in the first place. So that's the source of the evil on Scarn. And then finally, why can't you go west? My thought is the oubliette is sort of like a Klein bottle messing with the surface of Scarn planet itself. So that part of the planet over that ocean is basically twisted in some kind of weird balloon knot. So if you go near there, you just kind of get spun around. And you just can't, because that's like maybe a way into that or something. I don't know. I haven't figured that out too well myself. But that could be some kind of hand-wave wizarded explanation as to why you can't go west. So it's something to do with the way that oubliette was made. So that also explains the stars. Because in the Divine War, they said the stars fell. The stars can't all fall. You looked at the Milky Way?
Right.
Well, what if Scarn doesn't have a Milky Way?
Right.
What if it had some really finite number of stars, but they're not other sun? They're just weird sparkly lights that lead to zodiac dimensions, and they fell, and then the gods had to put them back. So and they're mimicking what stars look like around the planet. So that's my kind of wackadoo explanation.
Yeah.
But to me, it maps. I know I would love to hear feedback as to other people think that works for them. But that's what I run, and that's actually my long running campaign is that concept. So that's what works in my version of the Scarred Lands. I welcome apply that to their version of the Scarred Lands. Mind you, that's obviously super epic scale, and presumably either the Titans killed Evil Moon or put it to sleep, put it into hibernation. But either way, it's been in hibernation for millions of years.
Yeah.
So,
or it just simply doesn't have enough power left over to affect anything around it directly.
Yeah. Unless you're me and you do something to wake it up.
Right. What's this? Poke it.
Which, of course, I in my campaign I poked it in the ear, and it's a very large object. But yeah, that and I can talk about that in a future session.
Nice.
And it does involve some other stuff. But that's kind of my meta plot, is around what the heck this nameless orb is. And there's a god of it too, but nothing to do with the Slarecians. But could that be the explanation of why the Slarecians are trapped on Scarn? It is in my canon.
Yeah.
Whether it is yours, I don't know. But that is not considered core canon yet. I have no idea how much influence I'm ever gonna have on core canon. I have like 9 more books to write, but and whether future books through Shadows and Dreams are canon, I don't know. But that's like super spoilers of future through Shadows and Dreams, which none of this is even hinted at in the first book.
It's good to plot ahead, though.
Yeah. So have fun with that.
Any other info?
I think that's unless you're planning to run the Slarecians, you can pick up Echoes of the Past, and that gives you kind of a description of the other 603 act that I didn't talk about.
Yeah.
My thought about them also is if you're running them, I try to make things as weird and non-Euclidean as possible. So like
the angles.
Yeah, look at like a bunch of Escher stuff, and that should be what like a Slarecian ruin looks like.
Yeah,
it's just it hurts your brain, and it's all wibbly and crystalline, but all like dimensions are going in the wrong direction.
I also got the feeling a lot of it was in the Vengeance of the Shuns series that's on Slarecian Vault. Several of us were like, we're going to run with the Slarecian stuff. And so some of us cut back because it really was just becoming another... I mean, it was like instead of this plot that Travis had worked out, we were like, we're gonna make it this other thing. So we cut that way back. But if you've seen Aliens, that
Oh
weird
yeah.
organic growth, like it was. That's a lot of what, like the Web of Razors, which is in the
Yep.
Kelder Mountains,
Hmm.
and like all of that is very organic material that they grew their buildings out of. It's all made from
Yeah.
beetles that they could psionically
Yeah.
control. Yay!
Carapaces. Like,
Yeah,
yeah, it was just so many like crystally carapaces. Like
yeah,
that was because there's like I think there's a Slarecian beetle.
yep,
There's a Slarecian worm.
yep. Actually,
I think I mentioned in the first cast about how Chardoon. Oh wow, why there's a hate on Chardoon, and now I remember why Chardoon hates the Slarecians. The worm that Mormo fed him that made him all twisted and writhy, were likely Slarecian in origin, because there's a thing called a Slarecian worm that eats into you and kind of messes you up on the inside,
yeah,
and the story goes that she infected him with these worms. So was it the same worms as the Slarecian worms? Probably. They're I think one of the only worms really mentioned in canon as a thing. So that maps that it was so that would be why he really hates them. And thank you for my own brain. I think the allergy meds are starting to calm down. I can think again. Archaeologist. That's the word.
archaeologists, yay! I think it's also interesting. Like, they're not really sci-fi, but there are sci-fi inspirations throughout a lot of their
Yeah.
ruins. So you have like these very sci-fi. They have like elevators that are essentially psionic elevators. You know, like they
Yeah.
didn't stop working. They're still doing their things. They have membrane gates, so they like close off, and they can like keep their creations at bay should they need to. Like all of these things that seem very sci-fi origin.
Yeah, I like to think of them as more sci-fi, because psionics
Yeah,
is sci-fi magic.
yeah,
I mean, Jedi the Force is kind of psionics, you know. The way I look at it, my little take is, I'm a giant ElfQuest fan. If you're familiar with the comics series ElfQuest, which is still in print today, still being published. The elves of ElfQuest get trapped on the world of Two Moons, and they can't leave, and they came to the planet in this crystal castle, this crystal egg thing. Feels really like Slarecians are like evil ElfQuest elves. You know, there's sort of something a little elf-like about them. They are Haiwani about them. They're really tall like the Haiwans. They're really thin like the Haiwans. Everything's made out of crystal, like the Haiwans and the elves. But they're like, you know, the evil version. if the Haiwans were none of them were benevolent except like
right.
maybe one, and they were all like into experimenting on the primitive races instead of having to fight them and mate with wolves. So it's like if the elves of ElfQuest twisted in one direction. But I agree. I totally see that sci-fi element about the Slarecians, because of that like organic sense, not in terms of like gooey organic, but in terms of like carapacey
Yeah,
organic, or not. It's not insect-y. It's like, but just like that hard-shelled kind of sense.
yeah,
You know? They're weird, suffice it to say. So and creepy, and like you'd walk down a hallway and it would be like all bubbly, and you know what I mean? Yeah,
yeah,
very Geiger.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
if Geiger and Escher had like a nightmare together. It would be a Slarecian ruin. So when you're
Yeah,
describing this to your players, this is kind of the feel, the vibe a vibe you could be going, is that, and throw in some weird crystals and other horror elements. But this I think adds a really nice horror to your campaign, because they're meant to be this just unworldly, unearthly alien thing.
yeah,
They don't give them an alignment. I mean, are they evil? They're evil in that sense, but they don't really give them an alignment because they don't map to an alignment, because
yeah,
they're completely amoral. They don't have concepts of good and evil, because they're just like not Vulcan logic beyond that. They're machine logic.
yeah.
So
Yep. Fran called them mechanistic, which I like. I really like that word.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a good.
Or with organic mechanisms,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Organic and
They're
crystal,
not like machines in the way we think of machines, but
yeah,
things that you grew
yeah.
through psionic powers and such. Yay.
They don't have metal. They don't usually use metal. They do something else. Yeah, but it's really deep into that lore of, and came out of that psionic book that came out for 3.5 or 3.0. Actually, I think it was 3.0, and you had to I never had to download the how to 3.5 this book. It wasn't even a 3.5. It's like 3.0 is like, we're gonna do psionics, and never mind, it was a bad idea. And I don't even know if psionics appeared in 4th edition. I didn't get into 4th edition, so I had like one book for 4th edition. No idea. I can see all the books behind you.
I don't see one, but there was a Dark Sun book, so it had to
So,
work its
yeah.
way in there somehow.
Somewhere, yeah. So how that works, I don't know, but yeah, I didn't even have I don't remember having a 3.5 psionic hand, but I just had the 3.0 one and had to modify it. So.
And there was a lot of psionic stuff that grew throughout because of the OGL, and so
yeah. And I'm glad. I'm so the best thing I think for D&D was the OGL. Is the OGL. It's just why is Scarlands back? Why are we able to do the content for the vault?
Absolutely. Yay.
It's wonderful. And I love that I love, thank you, Onyx Path, making Scarlands open source so that we can go and write content and really expand on this universe.
Yeah.
So next time, the Divine War.
Sure.
Like the timeline of the Divine War.
We'll deep nerd on
what happened then.
How is it that the Titans are now in little pieces all over the place? Yay!
Yeah. Thank you everybody for who've joined us.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, tell us about yourself.
Sarah Stewart, author of Vigilant Through Shadows and Dreams, Book 1. Also creator on the Slarecian Vault. We worked with my wife, Fran Stewart, on both the novel and Calendar of the Scarred Lands, and our new module that came out a couple weeks back called Vigil Training Missions, a Maritime Patrol, or oh boy, what a bloody ordeal. Complete full puns. Oh boy, bloody ordeal. Where it's a full adventure. It's small, but full adventure where you get to go out in the Blood Sea and do some cool stuff in the Blood Sea, and it comes with a boat that you can then take on future adventures. Full description of this big galleon that you can run with. So we did that, and currently working on future endeavors.
Yay!
The Vault and for Scarn.
Looking forward to seeing all
very
of the...
much as freelancers.
Yay!
not. We signed the NDAs, but we're not OP employees.
Yay!
I don't know crap about inside, but yeah, there we are. So
awesome.
do pick up and read Vigilant, and if you see some hints about what Through Shadows and Dreams is all about, drop me a message. And if you give us a if you give us a review, Fran will write you a haiku.
About anything, right?
About anything, yeah.
Yay!
Awesome.
I'm waiting for the coronavirus haiku. I think she wrote one, actually.
That's funny. So I am Jeremy Hochhalter. Let's see, in addition to doing this, I run the Curiosity Cache, which actually will be on in about an hour if you're watching live. It's on at 4:30 Eastern on Fridays, and we're playing in the Scarred Lands. We're kind of the grim bright, more of the bright, being a little funny kind of game. There's definitely not a lot of this dark over yet. It's funny because some of the stuff we talked about today might be on my spreadsheet. I don't know. You can also find me on Slarecian Vault. I published the Peril Primer, which you can find Slarecian stats for. Not the actual Slarecians, but the Gatekeeper's in there, the Dragon is in there. There's a bunch of the Gargoyle. There's a bunch of different things. You can find me on Twitter at WHPubs. Facebook is also facebook.com, WHPubs, or you can go to WHpublications.com. And we will see everyone next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, which is 2, right? 2 p.m. Eastern?
Like 2:05 to
Yeah.
10 p.m. Eastern.
Right, somewhere in there.
Somewhere in
Thanks
there.
for joining us today, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Stay safe, everybody.